endlessly searching for an original sin.
Let's do this. So hi everybody, welcome back to Sweet Pool. We're doing this live for everybody to enjoy. We're gonna start here. You can see there's another save. That's from a messed up recording. So let's continue. When the nurse asked them what happened, they made up a story on the spot. Tetsuo's cut was now merely a scratch at this point. Had Yuji mistaken the size of the wound? His memories were growing fuzzy. Once he was patched up, they left the nurse's office and headed to the lockers to change their shoes. Surely the study session would be cancelled after all that had happened, he thought. But just as Yuji headed for the doors, Tetsuo grabbed his arm from behind. They stared at each other for a moment, then Tetsuo walked off, dragging Yuji with him. Confused, Yuji followed him outside, not that he had much of a choice. At first, he didn't know what to think, but as they walked, he slowly put two and two together. It seemed that Tetsuo was hell-bent on studying after all. They headed for the gates, Tetsuo's hand still on his arm. There were no other students nearby, and the lights of the fading sunset cast the town in shades of red. He was going to Tetsuo's house again. What? Hold on, what? Why is it red? Why is it red? That's why it's red. Wondering why this made his heart pound, Yuji followed Tetsuo through the gates. They got off the stop after Yuji had soon arrived at the Shiranuma residence. I'm just going to call it Shiro residence. Nervous, Yuji walked inside to discover the telltale silence of an empty house. They headed down the hallway towards Tetsuo's room. As they passed by the garden, Tetsuo suddenly opened the sliding door and stepped into what appeared to be the living room. He grabbed the bag of something and sat down on the porch. Confused, Yuji peered over his shoulder. A black cat was rubbing itself against Tetsuo's leg. As Tetsuo reached into the bag, the cat's ears perked up, and it leapt gracefully into his lap. The bag was full of dried sardines. The cat has chosen its master. Yuji sat down next to Tetsuo, hoping to get a better look. The moment the cat spotted the dried sardine in Tetsuo's hands, its eyes gleamed. Snatching the sardine in its mouth, it hopped to the ground once more and began to gnaw loudly on its prize. Yuji watched it eat, its back hunched over like a fuzzy black loaf. He'd been fond of animals for as long as he could remember, though he and his sister had been too sickly to own any pets themselves. He could still remember that one family trip to the zoo. What an absolute joy it had been. Within moments, the cat had gobbled down the sardine and was back on Tetsuo's lap, licking its lips expectantly. Somehow, Tetsuo's expression seemed a lot softer as he played with the cat. Tetsuo grabbed a few sardines and tossed them on the ground. The cat quickly hopped off his lap, grabbed one of the fish in its teeth, and settled down to eat it some distance away. With the cat distracted, Tetsuo got up and returned the bag of sardines to its place in the living room, then headed for his bedroom. Yuji followed behind. Tetsuo opened the door and gestured for him to enter first. His nervousness spiked as he stepped inside. You know what I forgot? Hold on. I forgot something. Sorry. I'm dumb. Where is the thingamabob? Here it is. How do I make it? I think this is the one? No. Yeah, there we go. This was now his third visit to the Shiranuma household, but he still wasn't quite used to it. Tetsuo set his book bag on the floor and sat on the bed. Unsure what to do, Yuji stood idly for a moment, then Tetsuo seized his hand. He yanked Yuji over so hard he collapsed face first onto the bed. Before he could right himself, he left Tetsuo's breath tickle his shoulder. Yuji rolled over onto his back, and Tetsuo climbed on top of him. Decision time. Let's try blue first. His vision grew fuzzy, and his breath caught in his throat. He could feel the memory of his rape threatening to revive itself in his mind. As much as he wanted to forget that it had ever happened, his body remembered every last detail. Before he could get the words out, something pressed against his lips. For a moment, he didn't understand what was happening. Then the warmth latched onto him, and then it clicked. He was so stunned he completely forgot to fight it. After pressing his lips against Yuji's for a few times, Tetsuo nibbled on his lower lip. A shiver ran down his spine. Then Tetsuo took it a step further and ran his tongue over Yuji's upper lip. A moan escaped his lips and he blushed. He tried to pull away, but Tetsuo grabbed his chin and kissed him again. Then his hand slid behind Yuji's head, pulling him closer. His tongue traced Yuji's teeth. Yuji could feel the will to resist slipping away. Instead, his mind was going numb. It felt comfortable somehow. Did Tetsuo really have a bunch of girls on rotation? He couldn't help but wonder in the back of his mind. I'm pretty sure he doesn't, dude. Their saliva mixed, wetting their chapped lips as they melted into each other. After a moment, Yuji pulled away, gasping for breath, unwilling to waste a single second. Tetsuo pushed his tongue into his mouth. Its wet warmth made goosebumps rise all over his body. Tetsuo's tongue prodded his teeth, teasing it. At this gentle gesture, Yuji felt himself relax and realized, belatedly, how tense he had been. He'd used to be so afraid of Tetsuo, but now, Tetsuo's touch, his warmth, his smell, it was all so comforting. He couldn't believe he felt this way about another guy, but there it was. In their previous encounters, disgust had been his strongest emotion. When his body had responded, he could tell himself that it was happening against his will. But now, kissing Tetsuo, he felt conflicted. Now that he no longer felt disgust, what excuse did he have? Each time Tetsuo's tongue slid over and around his, a pleasant tingle spread through his body. He was moaning a little harder than his dignity would have liked, but he couldn't stop. After exploring every inch of Yuji's mouth, Tetsuo gently pulled away. A string of saliva briefly bridged the gap between their lips before breaking. Hastily wiping his mouth back with the back of his hand, Yuji turned away. Sorry, hold on. Here we go. How was he supposed to look Tetsuo in the eye after that? His face was burning hot, as if all the blood in his body had rushed to his head. Meanwhile, Tetsuo somehow showed no signs of embarrassment as he gazed at Yuji silently.
なんだよ。
By the way, I have my new Bayonetta glasses. You're so cute. Flustered, he spoke a little more harshly than he meant to, but Tetsuo simply closed his eyes and buried his face in Yuji's chest. His tanned arm slid under Yuji's body, wrapping him in a tight embrace. This was a little alarming, but thankfully Tetsuo didn't take things any further. The thick frame, firm muscles, broad shoulders, solid weight. His body was masculine in every way. And yet somehow Yuji didn't mind. Their body heat mingled together. It was so comforting, Yuji could feel himself growing drowsy. Stop it. Tetsuo turned his head and pressed his cheek to Yuji's chest. Was he listening to his heartbeat? For a fleeting moment, all of Yuji's doubts and worries were forgotten. Sorry. Put that over there. For a fleeting moment, all of Yuji's doubts and worries were forgotten. In this moment, it felt like Tetsuo could understand him even without words.
呼べよ。いつでも。
Tetsuo muttered faintly. Before Yuji could ask him what he'd meant, his book bag began to vibrate loudly.
ちょっと悪い。
Well, we know that's not going to be Makoto after what he just tried. Yuji sat up and dug his phone out. Part of him was disappointed that their peaceful little moment had been interrupted. Nevertheless, he checked his notifications. Erica had sent him a message. Getting bigger every day, one photo attached. It was a picture of his little nephew, smiling with chubby cheeks. He seemed to have Erica's eyes. Suddenly, he wanted Tetsuo to see it too.
これ、姉さんの子供。この間生まれたんだ。
Tetsuo leaned over and looked at the screen.
子供ってどう思う？どうって苦手だ。どこが？触ったら壊れそうだろ。
Thank you, Steam, for letting me know the quarry downloaded. Surprised, Yuji shot Tetsuo a look. His answer had been uncharacteristically delicate.
壊れないよ。
I mean, if you drop them, they might. Tetsuo glanced at Yuji, then shifted his gaze back to the screen.
お前に似てる。この子が？ああ。どこが似てると思う？目元が。
That was the part Yuji thought resembled his sister, not him. Though people often said they looked a lot alike.
最初から人を信用してないような目とか、よく似てる。
Was that a burn? This little remark provoked a sharp look from Yuji.
なんだよそれ。そのまんまだけど、信用してないって。人と話してて楽しいと思ったことないだろ。
Yuji fell silent. He couldn't deny it. He could understand the concept of enjoying a conversation, but he'd never experienced it himself.
姉貴は違うのか。え？それ見た時の反応、いつもと違う顔だった。
Tetsuo indicated Yuji's phone with a jerk of his chin. Yuji stared at him in surprise. He couldn't believe Tetsuo was so observant.
それは唯一の肉親だから。
Not anymore. Yuji lowered his gaze back to the photo as he spoke.
両親は？事故で死んだ。だいぶ前に。
Did the cult? I wonder if the cult killed his family. As soon as the words left his lips, he realized that it was the first time he'd ever told anyone about that. He'd never even told Makoto. Even if Makoto had asked, Yuji probably would have dodged the subject. Right now, however, he felt perfectly comfortable discussing it.
白沼は兄弟とかいないのか
He had a feeling the answer was no, but decided to ask anyway.
知らない。知らない
He shot Tetsuo a dubious look.
知らないってなんだよ。養子だから、俺。
Oh! For a moment, he wondered if he misheard.
本当の両親とか知らないし。
Yuji hadn't seen this coming, but more surprising than the revelation was the fact that Tetsuo seemed so nonchalant about it.
知りたくなることはないのか本当の両親がどこにいるのか別に。
Sorry, guys. So, where did that fall? Not there, but I could be. He'd never met his real parents and didn't even want to. That meant he would never learn his roots. He had no memories of his parents, of their warmth. I mean, his adoptive mom seems nice. The mere thought filled Yuji with anxiety, as if the ground beneath him were crumbling away. The way Tetsuo talked, it was as if he felt no attachment to the concept of family at all. Yuji found this terribly sad. Tetsuo's adopted mother seemed like a sweet woman, but surely he must have an emptiness in his heart that even her kindness couldn't fill. It might fade over time, but it would always be there, waiting to rear its head in the slightest provocation. If he were in Tetsuo's shoes, the thought alone was frightening. A moment. Oh, I was wondering what was hitting my leg. Miko has the cone of shame on. As long as you had at least one blood relative, you could support each other through thick and thin. Yuji had his sister, as well as the memories of his parents. But Tetsuo had none of that. He was perpetually alone, eternally empty. Perhaps that's why something had felt off during that dinner. Maybe Tetsuo had closed himself off from his adoptive family. Or maybe he couldn't bring himself to open up. Perhaps he treated other relationships the same way.
飯食いに行くか
Wrong button. Tetsuo got to his feet. Following his cue, Yuji grabbed his book bag altogether as they left the room. He still didn't quite understand how Tetsuo's mind worked, but it felt like he was finally starting to put the pieces together. Alright, hold on. I think that's a good spot for that one.